Michaela is a PhD, I just learned, in Asian studies. I am so impressed. And she is now a best-selling author and a lovely human being, I've just discovered. Genuinely one of the nicer authors that we hear. But you probably already knew that. Won't you please put your hands together and give Michaela a warm welcome.
Thank you guys so much for coming here. I think it's already a breakthrough to have a room full of people on a wonderful Californian evening in an independent bookstore. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I just published this book, Bouncing Forward, and it's about post-traumatic growth. And before I talk about post-traumatic growth, I would love to know how many of you have heard of post-traumatic stress or PTSD? Everybody, it's pretty much everybody. And how many of you have heard of post-traumatic growth? A few people. That's great. It's like 3 or 4. Well, some of you are professionals. So that's really why I wrote the book, because pretty much everybody has heard of post-traumatic stress, and almost nobody has heard of post-traumatic growth. Whereas in reality, post-traumatic growth is actually much more common than PTSD. Up to 90% of people who experience a trauma will experience one or more signs of growth, like a new appreciation for life or new perspectives in life. And even if you don't know the term, and I didn't actually know that there was a term for it, you might have experienced some post-traumatic growth. If you've been through some hard times, there might be something of value you've come out of it with. So that's really what post-traumatic growth means. It means taking a hard experience and learning something from it, becoming more compassionate, emerging from it wiser or with a new perspective. And so, you've heard what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, right? And really, the idea of post-traumatic growth is as old as the oldest book. I mean, it's in the Bible. Jesus' story is a story of post-traumatic growth. Buddha's life story is a story of post-traumatic growth. Hollywood is all about post-traumatic growth. Batman is an example of post-traumatic growth. So, very often the hero has to go through trials before he can discover a new wisdom or come back with a new perspective, right? So that's really what that means. So the idea isn't new, but what's new is that there's actually a science behind it. And pretty much every week there are new studies coming out, and we're learning more and more what makes the difference. Why do some people grow after a traumatic event, and why do others fall apart? And what can we do to learn to grow rather than falling apart? Or maybe we fall apart and then we grow. So when I talk about trauma, I don't just mean the big capital T trauma, like the war in Iraq, or being diagnosed with a terminal illness. But often it's everyday traumas that pull the rug up from under us, like a divorce, or a surgery, or a non-life-threatening illness. Or in San Diego, I'm told, it's the Chargers. Right?
We all have it.
I hear some dramatic screams coming out of the TV room, and the Chargers are playing. So I don't want to trivialize trauma, but really, I've learned that, for instance, I spoke with a man who had cancer, and he said the cancer wasn't the traumatic thing for him, it was his divorce. So for some people, a divorce is a relief, and for others, it's a traumatic experience. For some, going to war in Iraq is the most meaningful mission of their lives, and for others, it's a traumatic experience. So it depends on the meaning we give it. It depends on how much do we lose, who is there for us, how far back is it. So it's a lot of factors that determine how we respond to a traumatic event or a potentially traumatic event. And so the question that, as a journalist, you meet a lot of people who've been through something hard. And this question has really tugged at me for a very long time, for maybe 20 years, why some people come out of such events stronger and more compassionate, and why others fall apart. And then this became deeply personal when I fell apart, because when I was in my 20s, I became quite ill, and kind of overnight. Within days, I went from being a world traveler and climbing up to the base camp of Mount Everest to being bedridden. And the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. And so all of a sudden, you know, when you're in your 20s, you're supposed to be on top of the world, right? And you're supposed to work on your career and get things done. And here I was, and I wasn't getting anything done. I had a hard time getting out of bed even. I mean, I just couldn't move my body, and no matter how much I wanted to, it just wouldn't obey. So I had thought I was resilient before, and then I realized I'm not resilient. And that sparked this journey of asking other people, well, you know, how did they do it? That they've survived things that are much more severe than what I've gone through, and yet they managed to grow from it. So that's what I wanted to learn. And so I thought, instead of just reading from the book, because you can read the book yourself, I'll bring you a few images that I've collected on this journey and talk just about a few of the people that impressed me the most and that I've learned from the most. So this, you know, the title Bouncing Forward is actually a quote from Maya Angelou, who I had the fortune of speaking with shortly before we lost her. And she spoke about her emergence from childhood trauma as bouncing forward, going beyond what the naysayer said. And her life story is really it's almost like a course book in post-traumatic growth, because she experienced so much violence, sexual violence, racial violence, and yet to come out of that with a message of forgiveness and love impressed me deeply. So when I started out, I thought that it was, you know, the famous people, like Maya Angelou or like Nelson Mandela, who said, difficulties break some men and make others. There was those great people who were able to grow. Or people like Malala Yousafzai, who talks about that day when she was shot in the head as the day when fear died and courage was born. So that's the people we give Peace Nobel Prizes to, right? Because we admire them. And sometimes I think hearing these great stories makes me feel smaller, because I'm like, well, there are these great people over there, but, you know, I'm just this big, and I can't do what they did, right? And so I was relieved to find out that it's not just these already wonderful people, but that it's really everyday people who are able to learn from these tough experiences.